Welcome everyone to another Performance and Sports Science Study Group webinar. My name is Daniel Yu. I'm a sports scientist for the Orlando Magic.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Nick Seamy. I'm a head athletic trainer here for the Grand Rapids Gold, an affiliate with the Denver Nuggets.
And together we're really excited to welcome Jake Allen. Jake Allen is a performance and rehab coach, and he will be our speaker. He has worked with a ton of athletes at Mizzou, University of Texas, University of Houston, and with me at the Mets. And across all those different locations, he's worked with multiple different team sports. So he brings a ton of experience in programming for various team sport athletes. If you have questions at any point, feel free to just drop them in the chat and Nick and I will moderate them. After Jake's presentation, we'll open it up for a quick Q&A. And without further ado, I will pass it over to Jake.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Daniel and Nick, for having me on. Very, very honored and privileged. And yeah, we'll kickstart this. I'm going to be talking about the periodization of programming, how I've used it in with my team sport athletes. That's where I really think this style of periodization shines. I'll also kind of go ahead and give a little bit of an example. As Daniel mentioned, I have worked in the rehab setting as well. I was with the Mets. So I'll kind of talk about briefly how I've utilized it in kind of the final phases of return to play for some of my athletes in that sense. All right. So what is vertical integration? It's a periodization model where you never quite shelf one attribute or one trait. So you train each quality concurrently throughout the year or throughout this training cycle. And I like to think of it as a continuum, similar to like the energy systems. So with the energy systems, you're never strictly training or utilizing just the aerobic system. It's kind of just which one has more priority at that given time. So that's what I like to consider when I think about vertical integration is we're always training every different attribute, every physical quality. It's just to what direction are we turning that dial of each. So sometimes we turn the strength dial up, sometimes we turn it down, and we kind of place more emphasis on other attributes. So a big reason that vertical integration is so beneficial is due to the training residual effects. So just to kind of reiterate training residuals, it's the length of time that specific adaptations go while being untrained before you start to diminish those qualities. This is a very dummied down version of the training residuals chart. If you guys want to get more into the details, you can Google it or you can open up Super Training by Mel Siff and you'll get more than plenty explanations on training residuals. But the big one for me is the speed and power, and how, because it's such a neural-driven trait, both of those, you only really have 5 to 7 days, give or take, maybe 1 or 2 days on either end before you really start to see significant decline in those traits. So by using vertical integration, by always making sure you're tapping in at least once a week, or every 5 to 7 days of a heavy strength stimulus and a heavy speed stimulus. Not only does it protect us from injury, particularly soft tissue injuries, but it really helps keep those neural, those enzymes, that nervous system, everything firing, so you never quite go into that detrained state. A couple other reasons to utilize vertical integration. It provides consistent exposure, like I talked about earlier on the last slide, prevents that detraining of the physical qualities. Also, because we are always utilizing them to some extent, we never have to really, ease into a specific training phase. So if you don't train, let's say hypertrophy for maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks because you're following a traditional linear or block periodization method or style, you typically have to spend at least a week or so kind of acclimating the athlete back into that, block, right? You have to hit some kind of a transition block. So because we're not completely shelving any of these qualities, it allows much easier kind of transition. And I have anecdotally actually gotten a lot of feedback from my athletes that there's a lot less soreness when we utilize vertical integration as opposed to linear block. But this is kind of the big main reason. So if you guys are taking notes or anything, I would make sure you put an asterisk, a star, a highlight, underline, whatever, this final bullet point. The reason that I love vertical integration for team sport athletes is because no matter what, majority of team sport athletes, whether it's baseball, basketball, soccer, football, right? They are always chaotic events, and they are never training just a single trait at any given time in the year. As much as we want to, believe that. So like when I first got into coaching, I was so carried away or so focused on making sure that my training sessions, whether if I was in max strength block, they had to align with my energy system training. So if I was doing max strength, I had to be doing, acceleration or, high speed, running. If I was doing hypertrophy and endurance stuff in the weight room, I had to be doing, aerobic or, lactic type training on the track or on the field because I was so worried that they had to match up. Well, once I started kind of taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture and watching more practices, watching more games, I realized, pardon my French, the coaches don't give a shit what training block I'm in. They don't care if I'm in week 2 of a max strength phase. If someone screws up or they feel like the players, aren't in good enough shape, they're going to have them running suicides or pulls or whatever. And so as a strength coach, as a practitioner, sports scientist, whatever your discipline is, it's always important to step back, zoom out, look at the big picture, and think about what is the actual demands that these athletes are being placed under on a grand scale, not just from us in a program that we're delivering to them. So that's why vertical integration is such a beneficial thing to utilize, because it better matches and better mirrors the overall demands that the athletes in team sports are exposed to on a more consistent basis. So with traditional linear periodization, as I've touched on already, if you're layering different qualities, one training block after another, you might go 4, 6, maybe even 8 weeks without truly hitting, max strength if you follow a basic traditional periodization, like linear periodization model. So when you get back to it, your nervous system is downregulated. You're losing out on certain enzymes that maybe have not been kind of honed in on or lost because of the time off. So that's a big one. And where vertical integration comes in, again, it's just preventing that detraining effect. So with the CNS recovery performance, Charles Francis is actually the kind of creator of this model. And he paired this with his high-low model. What this does is it alternates high intensity days or sessions with low intensity recovery days and sessions. And I'll kind of go into some examples here in a few slides, but the high days, that will include, your traditional max lifts, sprinting, sport specific agility, where you have the heavy eccentric demands from, cutting drills, stuff like that. And then your low days, tempo runs. It's very important that you keep these low days low. So the tempo runs or any kind of recovery work, whether it's a light bike session or swim session, it's very important to keep it 75% of heart rate or however you're tracking intensity. So 75% or lower, because that 75 to kind of 90, 95% range is kind of that gray area where you're actually tapping into your recovery and not really truly allowing those, recovery adaptations to kick in. Whereas 75% and below, there's been a lot of research that have shown that's actually going to help really just by kind of generating that blood flow, and it's actually going to increase your recovery. And that's considered kind of like the active recovery, quote unquote. And the outcome that we're seeking with this is that sustained neural output, and it improves the consistency, in those adaptations. So again, just kind of reiterating the high-low, why it works. It prevents that overtraining, right? So making sure you keep your high days high, your low days low. That was something Daniel can attest to with the Mets. We were very high on. And an example, which I'll actually get on the next slide, was with baseball players. Pitchers are a great example for this type of model. But again, it maximizes neural output while avoiding that CNS fatigue. And then it better mirrors our team sport athletes' demands by giving those multi-directional demands, the high session days, attack the qualities and the traits that they're going to need in their competition, where the low days are going to be more that recovery day. So where you really double down on things such as the soft tissue work, the mobility work, that kind of make them feel good. So this is a great example. I should have relabeled this. I realized that as it was kind of too late, but let's just use this as kind of an example of like a baseball pitcher, right? So anytime a pitcher makes a throw or a pitch to, the catcher, whether it's a bullpen or a game, especially in a game, they're doing it with nearly 100% intent every single time. So that's a very high demand on the central nervous system, as well as obviously the peripheral systems, the musculoskeletal systems. But if we look at, let's say, Sunday, okay, let's say that's their game day. Let's say they have an outing on Sunday. A big thing for me is making sure we keep those high days high. So 99% of the time, I would have my pitchers, especially in pro ball. College, I had a little bit more tough time with this, but especially in pro ball, I would 99% of the time have my pitchers lift after their outings. The reason for that is if we wait till the next day, we're just tapping into the recovery and it's not allowing them that full time to adapt and recover and bounce back for the next outing, right? So doubling down on those high intensity days is crucial. So lift them after they play. The following day will be that recovery day. Give them 24 hours off, get them in the training room, get them in the cold tub, get that soft tissue work, and really hammer that mobility. Something I also want to kind of touch on, because their nervous system has already been so depleted, these post-game lifts, we're really just focusing on getting one or two main strength stimuli and attacking those as hard as we can, maybe 2 sets, maybe 3 sets total at a top intensity. Doing no plyometrics because I just didn't see any value in that because there was very little, output in that regard. And then really hammering their mobility, right? The hips, their, external rotation of their shoulder, things like that. As the week goes on, then we follow that high-low model, right? So the following day, low recovery work. Then the next day is either a light catch day or the following day will be a bullpen day. So again, that's another high-stress day. So we lift them again after the bullpen day. Then we'll give them a day or two of low before they come back for their outing. So what this does is, again, make sure that we're more than anything keeping their nervous system primed. Because at the end of the day, especially in season, the main task is for them to be at their best when they go out and compete, whatever it is they're competing in. And then there really isn't too much when you're looking at the actual creating the macro cycle. The phases don't really change compared to really linear periodization as far as like what the goals are. It's just that kind of like I talked earlier about, we're just hitting every single trait to some capacity, right? So if we're in a max strength block, obviously that's going to be the majority of our training in our A series. But doesn't mean that we're completely neglecting our hypertrophy, or maybe we'll throw in on maybe a midweek lift. Maybe we'll flip it to where, all right, today's going to be more of a hypertrophy based, even though it falls in the middle of our max strength training block. So again, it's just a way to make sure that we're not shelving any attribute for the reasons we talked about earlier. Same thing here. As we transition kind of preseason phase, our high days, instead of being more max strength, this is just my personal programming style, is I love to utilize velocity based training. So we'll transition more to that strength, speed, strength style. But again, what that allows me to do is, because I'm using the VBT as that feedback, what I can do is at any given time, any given session, I can switch just very easily by going to the iPad or the monitor, whatever it is we're using, and just say, all right, hey, I want one set at maybe 0.4 meters per second. That's going to be a very heavy set. And then from there, we can back off. So that's just another way to just kind of microdose the vertical integration across the course of a training cycle or a entire season by doing things like that. In season, I put an asterisk here next to the maintain, because I'm a firm believer that should be the minimum, is to maintain your key qualities. Especially the younger the athlete, the lower the training age, you can still see significant improvements in several key qualities while limiting the fatigue. But at minimum, we want to maintain everything that we achieved in the off season. What better way to do that than by using vertical integration and making sure that we are still training every single trait throughout the entire course of that season. So again, in season, if I were to pick one place to utilize vertical integration over the others, it would definitely have to be in season more times than not. Postseason, same thing, very similar as far as the overall goals to any other periodization model, right? It's all about recovery and restoration, reintroducing more of the eccentric work. Even though I come from a very, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Alan Bishop, Charles Poliquin, I come from that coaching tree, so very big believer in eccentric and isometric training year round, and this is just another way to implement it into vertical integration without kind of leaving people super sore, right? Our athletes super sore. A lot of people associate eccentric training with extreme muscle soreness. Well, that's only if you're detrained to it. Anything that gives you soreness is just something your body's not used to, just a foreign stimulus or stimuli that you're giving it. So by utilizing eccentric training, isometric training at certain periods of in the season, and never shelving them, just kind of knowing when and how much to utilize them. As we get in the off season, now we can ramp it up, and we'll see much more significant adaptations at a much quicker rate because it's not something that we just completely shelved over the course of the season. And then again, as I talked about, this is just how I utilize it, and that return to play programming, right? So the 1 through 5, that's not anything of kind of a hierarchy of what I deem most important, least important. These are just things that I look at personally as a strength conditioning coach when getting an athlete back to game ready. So something that I think is a very misunderstood or forgotten or just underappreciated aspect of the return to play protocols, just in general, it's a very general statement, is a lot of times athletes will graduate from physical therapy and working with their ATs or PTs and then being cleared for game action. And we see a ton, no matter what sport, what level, I still feel like the re-injury rate across all athletics for how much we know and where technology is these days is way too high personally. And I just feel like there's a disconnect in a lot of between that late stage return to play protocol and getting them actually ready for gameplay. So by utilizing vertical integration in this, it again exposes the athletes to every single demand on a daily basis or a weekly basis, depending on how you want to program it. And that ensures that they are more game ready, I think, than any other style of periodization. So usually in the early stages, I would stick to a block or linear periodization, especially if it's an ACL like this example, or a Tommy John, where we know it's going to be minimum 9 months, sometimes 12 months or longer. But in that late stage, typically the last maybe 2 months, I try to transition them into this VI model, high-low model. Because again, it gets them back into the normal feel, the normal flow, at least for how my athletes know that I program for them once they are healthy and back into the swing of things. Just to reiterate, we've touched on these already, but the key benefits are that superior adaptation retention, right? Reduces detraining. The high-low sequencing is really the best way, I think, to ensure the CNS is always ready to go. And then it gives us that season-long flexibility, so we can easily turn the dial up, turn the dial down on certain stressors. And then from the return to play protocol, just like we talked about, it allows them, I think, much easier to get integrated back into a normal, quote unquote, style of training. So here are 3 different very, very sound scientific pieces of evidence and support to back it up. One, we got the training residuals, just everything we've talked about already. The high-low model, we've talked about that, and the multilateral development model, basically just training every attribute at simultaneously has been actually shown to increase the long-term athletic development, especially in those individuals with younger training ages. So yeah, that's basically all of it. Just to wrap it up, vertical integration represents the evolution of periodization, in my opinion. By giving both the scientific principles as far as adaptation and limiting the detraining effect, but more importantly, I think, is the fact that it mirrors those chaotic demands of the team sports that majority of our team sport athletes will face on a given given daily or weekly or monthly basis. So going to open this up to questions. Feel free. I would love to have a great discussion with you all, and hopefully keep this around for another few minutes at the minimum. You want them to put the questions in the chat, Daniel, or you want to kind of unmute and ask them through the mic?
Either or, whichever people are more comfortable with. Great work, Jake. That was super insightful.
Jake, appreciate that. I can kick it off if no one else has one right now. But so kind of being in the more rooted in rehab as a PTAT and working with the sport performance or strength and conditioning side, how have you integrated this periodization model with some of these longer term rehabs? So someone that might be undergoing, ACL or some sort of, shoulder labral repair or, whatever injury that again is multi-month. Have you been sitting down with the medical department and help kind of map that out with them? Is it like pretty integrated, or has it been pretty separate in your experience in the professional sports side?
So especially with the Mets, my previous year, I worked with who's now the medical coordinator, Anthony Oliveri. And I think no matter what, I think the relationship between the AT and the S&C is probably the most important relationship there is. So gaining that trust, working with each other, we would sit down and we would every single day, first thing we do, we'd have a full performance staff meeting, and we do it. I would then meet with Anthony, the trainer, post game as well. We go over the entire day, every single person that came in to lift, every single person that came in to get any kind of treatment, anything that may have came up during the game or throughout the day that we weren't able to communicate, and then kind of go from there. Now, as far as the actual rehab stuff and the planning, we would sit together, and again, every single day we would compare our rehab planners, and we would basically build them out simultaneously with one another. So a big thing that especially for, let's say, a hamstring injury, for instance, right? Making sure that depending on what the running progressions were for that day, making sure that they did nothing that would put them in a fatigued state prior to them going out and hitting their, especially if it's a high speed running day. So making sure that we did no eccentrics either in the training room or in the weight room before, especially early on in the return to play protocol, just to ensure that we're putting our athletes in the best case scenario to complete this day's work in a fresh, relatively safe environment. Now with the vertical integration, same thing applies. I would go in and I would basically see where they're at in the rehab stage, and from there I would just kind of figure out, really it was kind of that last box to check before giving them that kind of all clear to get into practice. So whenever the trainer told me that, hey, we are 6 weeks, I think, from Daniel being ready to go and get back into limited practice, that's when I typically would transition them into more of this vertical integration style, just because I felt like for me that's the last box to check to make sure they can withstand all these different stresses being thrown at them at any given time, in less of a predictable fashion, for lack of better terms. That kind of answer?
That's perfect. I appreciate it. I think, just with my experience too in the past in the college setting, and then, here in Grand Rapids, just how crucial that connection is. And like you said, I think it's intentional collaboration and that daily collaboration, because there was a quote that I'd always remembered. It's collaboration doesn't happen by chance. And so I feel like it's a word that's talked about a lot. You have that multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary approach, but I think what you're saying, that high performance model, it takes that kind of planning and detail to give those athletes the best product, especially for those that are rehabbing. That's perfect. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Jake, we got a question in the chat from Drew. He said, great presentation. Any challenges you've had in implementing this in pro ball?
In pro ball specifically, I think the biggest challenge is um, the fact that, especially in minor leagues, where that's where I spent 2 seasons with the Mets, was in their, minor league low A affiliate, but as well as with the rehab side. Um, so minor league baseball, for those of you who may not be familiar, in season, you're playing 6 out of 7 days a week. So the only day off from the time spring training breaks until, the MLB postseason starts. So for about Daniel's at 6, 7 months, something like that, you're playing Tuesday through Sunday every single week except for the All-Star break, which where you get a whopping 3-day break. So the biggest challenge in pro ball is for the position players, particularly knowing how to implement the high stress days. And that's where, like I mentioned earlier, I use VBT, velocity based training, a ton because that really allows me to give the guys that um, the goals for the day, and they know exactly what they need to hit, and that regulates basically the weight and the speed and the intensity for both me and them. So yeah, I would say the biggest challenge in pro ball is just knowing when and how to push the guys, because some guys maybe only playing once a week. Some guys might play 12 out of 14 games. And you got to just get them in. You got to just make sure that you're getting still some kind of stimulus with those guys and even the guys who are not playing it, the guys who may be playing one day a week, then you got to be able to make sure they're getting even more thrown at them. And vertical integration is just as crucial for them because they're not getting the same exposures on the field, right? So now we got to figure out, okay, where, Alex may be playing, 6 days a week. So, we need to make sure that he's getting, the opposite of what the demands are of baseball. So we need to make sure we're really hitting his heavy strength stuff hard. Well, Paul might only be playing one day a week. So he's not getting the same, rotational work, the same, sprint effort, stuff like that as everybody else is on the field. So just knowing how and when on an individual basis to push and pull, I think is crucial.
Awesome. We got another question. This one is from Jessica. She said, which qualities would you highlight within the vertical integration model for a match day +1, +2 in soccer? She has found herself not using recovery days to their full potential in the gym and focusing too much on passive modalities such as biking, stretching, or contrast. And this is for a high minute player.
I mean, depending on the level, I am a very big proponent of getting them in post game, especially if it's a high minute player. And I don't know what the schedule is like, but let's say you only have 2 days between matches. If you can again consolidate that stress into one day and get them in for a 15-20 minute micro dose session post game, hit them with some kind of max strength lift, and then that way the next day you can still maintain your current programming style of hitting that recovery the next day. I don't know if that answers the question fully. I hope it does. If not, please feel free to ask more. You can turn your mic off and we can kind of chat this out. But I see the chat here now. But that's kind of how I would do it. Depending on the level. Obviously, if you're working in pro sports, they're getting paid, so it's typically much easier for them to, I guess, it's their job, right? Whereas college or anything younger than that, I found it be much more difficult for them to come in post game. But yeah, that's what I would say is just try your best to get something in post game. And even if it's just trust me, I was on the road, and for those of you who aren't familiar, being on the road in pro baseball, minor league baseball is not pleasant. So we had plenty of post game lifts where it was literally just calisthenics, right? Long isos, eccentrics, stuff like that, to where at least we're giving them something, right? Give them something post game, figure out what they need. So going back to the pitcher example, right? We know that we really need to hit that posterior side of the shoulder, right? So a lot of manual work, a lot of overload eccentrics, just with either myself or our athletic trainer, We'd get them on, maybe some iso lunges, maybe get some banded, Nordic, something like that, to where, again, just 15, 20 minutes post game before they shower. And it's better than nothing. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. All right, I see this one from Jacob. Kids are crazy. Have you seen vertical integration translate into CGS sports? Anybody? CGS. What's that stand for?
Centimeter gram second. So I think like
Okay.
single sport.
Gotcha. So for track and field, I personally don't have. I have very, very little experience working with track athletes. But I mean, that's with Charlie Francis, who is the kind of godfather of vertical integration in a high-low model. He worked with some of the best Olympian track runners of all time and sprinters. So yeah, I think there definitely is some merit to utilizing in that sense. Endurance sports, same thing. I think endurance sports need strength work, just like an explosive athlete needs endurance work. So it just changes, I guess, the hierarchy of needs for how you program. So obviously, you're going to make sure that you're getting them the demands more necessary on a more frequent basis for their event. But in my opinion, you should always be training every athlete in some capacity in each physical attribute. That makes sense. I know I kind of said a lot there, but yeah, for endurance sport athletes, long answer. But I would say yes, definitely beneficial. Weightlifting, it's. I think you can take the principles that we talked about, especially with the regulating of the nervous system. But because it is such a skill sport, weightlifting, the programming demands are much different. So yes, I think still following the high-low model is very, very crucial for, especially because it's such a skill sport. So just making sure that on those low days, those are more your technique type days, right? Hitting some things like a snatch balance, things like that. Maybe a power jerk to where you're not hitting the full lifts, but it's not going to be as taxing. But you also want to make sure that it's a low enough stress day for when you do come back on your high stress days, you're able to hit your numbers and you're not, building yourself a big hole in recovery. Question from Drew: when you plan out high-low days, is that pertaining to the weight room or is that coordinated with the on-field staff as well? Okay, I'm glad you asked this question. So as much as possible, you want to have that relationship with your sports coaches to where you can have a say in the day or the week's plan. So the best ever that I was able to be a part of with this was when I was at University of Texas with the basketball program on Shaka Smart's staff. Shaka was so bought into the sports science and the recovery and everything. And hats off to the coaches and the strength and the sports science staff that was there before I even got there. Because when I got there, it was already, he was already bought in. But what this allowed for was every single week, we as a strength staff would go, we'd sit down, we'd meet with the sports science staff and with Shaka, with Coach Smart, and we would lay out the entire week. And we would be able to go and say, hey, all right, we have a game on this day. So therefore, this day is going to be a green day, basically meaning like green means go, right? Yellow days, a moderate day, red days, kind of a breather. I might have had those colors backwards. This was a couple years ago. But regardless of the fact, we were able to map out our high, medium, and low stress days for the practice plan and for the week. And we would have the heart rate monitors for the guys up on the TV monitor in the practice gym. And so we would be able to monitor every single guy's workload in real time during practice. And it even got to a point where we would know which drills elicited what kind of a heart rate response from our guys. So we would know, okay, hey, we have a green day on Friday. So therefore, these are the drills that we know elicit a green heart rate response. Maybe we need to do, a baseline out of balance practice and, more of a, half court type day. And then maybe, all right, our red day, it's gonna be our high intensity day. So now we can do more of our, full court 3-on-3 drills, stuff like that. So that was the best experience I've ever had with the coaching staff being bought in. But yes, I think you definitely need to take into account everything that they're doing, both weight room, on the practice court or practice field, and in game as well. Because again, we only have them in the weight room for maybe 3 hours out of the entire week, especially in season. So what we do has a very little impact as far as the global stress that they're being placed under. You're welcome, Jacob. Got any other questions?
Jake, I have another question here. In terms of VBT, how has your application of velocity-based training changed kind of with your time using it, or your familiarity with programming that way?
I think the biggest change has been going from solely using it as a way to, um, instead of just being, hey, we're, in a max strength block, excuse me, therefore we need to stay between 0.5 and 0.3 meters per second. I started to utilize it as more of an auto regulatory tool to where I know, all right, hey, kind of like I mentioned earlier, let's say Alex is playing 6 days this week. All right, well, we can still hit, everybody in this training session can still hit that, 0.3 to 0.5 is their goal. But what I would do is I'd start hitting cutoffs, or I would say, hey, you have a minimum of 2 sets at this velocity. Once you fall below this velocity for 2 consecutive sets, you're done. So Alex, who's playing 6 games this week, may only hit 3 sets before he starts to fall off. Whereas Paul, who's only played 1 game in the past 2 weeks combined, maybe he's hitting 7, 8 sets. And that shows me that we're getting basically we're getting the maximum amount of stress that's going to not fry the nervous system. And that's how I've kind of over the years really adapted with VBT, is using it as kind of my assistant coach on the floor, to where it can judge these guys, their nervous system, much better than anything I can, just by giving that feedback and knowing how fast to move with the bar when it's they're falling outside that range, and then we'll go from there.
Jake, of all the different residuals that you track, you have like strength, speed, power, oxidative energy system, etc. There's a ton of things that you're tracking. You have a lot of athletes, especially in the minor league system. Some are moving up, some are moving down, so you're getting new athletes. Is there a type of system or like a way you stay organized in tracking all of those different variables and knowing when to hit them again with that stimulus?
Yeah, I mean, technology is a big thing, as Daniel. You guys, when you were with the Mets, had a Jackson Bertoli is a friggin' cyborg as a sports scientist. He has everything dialed in for every affiliate, so he makes things extremely, extremely seamless when guys move up and down throughout the system. Really what it comes down to is making sure that the communication, just like I talked about, with the SCs and the ATs, PTs. It comes down to, I'm sure it's the same thing, Nick, with you and the, NBA and the G League, Daniel, same thing with you in the, G League. Making sure anytime there is any kind of movement, everybody's, communicating constantly. If you're not, and then going back to the tracking, if you're not tracking it, you have no idea what's actually going on, right? So the more you can track, I think the better. But I think a lot of people track a lot of stuff and don't provide actionable, plans behind it. I know, Daniel, you and I have had this conversation quite a bit, and it's kind of been the genesis of some things that we're working on. But there's a lot of data that's being collected constantly these days, But what good is data if you're not going to, do anything, with it to actually improve, the athlete's performance or health?
Excellent. Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
All right, well, we're coming up on our 45-minute mark. Jake, I want to be mindful of your time. Thank you so much for presenting for us today. If anyone has any final questions, feel free to leave them in the chat, or you could reach out to Jake. Jake, is there a place that would be best for them to reach out to you or follow if they want to stay up to date with what you're doing?
Yeah, you guys can follow me on Twitter. It is Coach Jake A. Allen. And then on Instagram, it is just jake.a.allen is my handle on there. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out at any time. Daniel and I are actually working on something very exciting together that we will be releasing more information on soon. So definitely, if you guys are interested in finding more about that, please shoot us both a follow, and we'd love to keep you guys in the loop on that. But appreciate you guys all for chiming in. Daniel, Nick, appreciate you guys for having me on, and hope everybody can take something away from this and make their athletes better.